Hello, my name is Cassandra Blanco. I am Roman Catholic and I welcome you to my podcast. Today, my guest is Zariyi Yusuf. So, this is actually the third podcast we have done together, and a lot has happened since the last podcast. I will leave the first two podcasts that we recorded together down in the description. So, if you're new, Zariyi is a Christian and he lives in Nigeria. And the last podcast Zariyi and I recorded was on October 11, 2025. Since that podcast on October 31st, 2025, President Trump redesignated Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Nigeria has been designated a country of particular concern by the U.S. State Department two times before, in December 2020 and October 2025. And in 2020, the designation was reversed by the Biden administration in 2021, but then has just been recently reestablished by the Trump administration. Yesterday, Representative Riley Moore introduced a resolution that in part states the U.S. will consider every option to protect vulnerable Christians from slaughter. So I wanted to give Zariyi an opportunity just to talk about these recent developments about the U.S. designating Nigeria a country of particular concern, and just let him share his thoughts as a Christian in Nigeria and what he has to say. So do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, thank you so much once again for this opportunity, Cassandra. The idea of designating Nigeria a country of particular concern is not exactly new, as most of our politicians, the government, and the leading Islamic figures want the world to know. Because initially, when they started off, they made it look as if, okay, the vice president was at the United Nations General Assembly, and he expressed sympathy to Hamas, the Palestinians, condemned Israel, and so Trump is just angry that why should he do that? And that basically is what initially they started spinning up. And by doing that, it gives an idea of the fact that we have a government who would do everything possible to not be on the CPC list. Now, the question is, what exactly does that mean, especially in the case of Nigeria? We have been there before. Like you said, the Biden administration got Nigeria off the list. And I think more than twice or thrice, there have been petitions to put Nigeria back. Reason being, once we got off the list, the dimension of the massacres grew exponentially. The sophistication of the arms that the killers are using grew, and then the casualty figures, skyrocketed. So the whole thing became a mess. And while a lot of people thought this is the right opportunity to put Nigeria back, it did look as if the Islamists, who basically got into power in 2015, had their way. In the US, possibly they had a lot of lobbyists in the United Nations, in the sub-regional bodies like the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, in the AU. Nobody said anything. So the Christians basically, as at the time, it wasn't this easy to speak, especially in Kaduna State, my state of origin, there was a lot of clampdown. They kill people and then they arrest those who want to talk about it. So everybody was just quiet about it. So many people didn't really know what was happening. And there was also the idea that the Christians actually didn't suffer any persecution. Possibly they found a way that some Americans, some Westerners were sympathetic to their cause, so they just wake up in the morning and claim they're being persecuted, and possibly they send them funds, relief and all of that. A man called Nasir El-Rufai, who was a governor in Kaduna State, kept churning out that narrative. It overwhelmed the media. He said they are just lying. It's because they want Westerners to send them money and all of that. So it went below the radar for a very long time. But I think because the Americans have been on it for a long time, a country that has been on the CPC list, people continued observing what was happening. I mean, there's a fellow, Mike Arnold, who has been visiting the country and then has been interfacing with these people. I am sure in his mind he must have thought, why is this country not on the CPC list? Why is the government pretending everything is fine? It means to us in Nigeria that the government will now be held accountable for either failing to address the issue of the genocide of Christians or being complicit in it. Because the whole idea is that there is an Islamist group that is ever growing that tends to have more sympathy from the government than even any decisive act of eliminating them. And they basically have been killing Christians. They've been targeting Christians and wasting them, killing people, fighting communities, and doing all kinds of things. Now, it is a welcome idea because we know that there are sponsors of this evil in high places. When when states like US do that, it means even those people who are way out of what we feel is our power to bring to account, they will pay for it. They would see sanctions, and like what we are looking forward to, I hope, would be a military intervention where these people would be taken out because our military has either failed to do it or has been in some form possibly sabotaged or compromised or complicit, sort of.
Right. Yeah. So practically, when we say that the country will be designated as a country of particular concern, what does that mean? Do you know? Like, is it sanctions on government officials? What
What
other
that
things
means
happen with that?
is there would be a focus on the activities going on within the country with regards to the persecution of any group in particular that called for that. Two, there would be sanction on public officials, especially those linked to the sponsorship of the genocide, linked to the activities of the Islamists. I see travel bans, I see freezing of accounts, I see possible arrests, maybe when they are caught in places that are friendly to the United States. I see likely eliminations because when you could arm people, it doesn't matter if you're putting on a suit or you are called by a big name. But when you arm people to eliminate women, you arm people to genocidally, massacre communities simply because they are Christians, then it automatically means that you also are a target, much as the foot soldiers are. Now, the other one is in terms of military aid, uh, the country will no longer be receiving that kind of military aid from the US, either hardware, either funding, either training. Reason being, there has been a failure over the years that huge sums, I mean, a lot of commitment from the United States of America to Nigeria has been such that the military would be able to fight terrorism. But it has only been growing. New groups have been coming up, their numbers have been increasing, and then the government has become weaker and more friendly to the terrorists. So we see a lot of sanctions and then the likelihood of possibly a military intervention.
Okay. Yeah. And that does bring us actually to what then President Trump. So what I had just read to you and stated was designated on October 31st. And then just a few days later, actually the next day, November 1st, President Trump wrote on Truth Social, if the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria and may very well go into the now disgraced country guns a-blazing, in quotations, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I am hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians. Warning, the Nigerian government better move fast. So I have seen on X varied responses. The United States has a history of military intervention that has not been very successful in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And so there are people, both in America and I've also seen in Nigeria, who are completely resistant to the idea of military intervention or, the U.S. military getting involved in any way in Nigeria. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that and what your perspective on
Well,
it is.
the United States, they actually do have there isn't a country that is morally perfect or that has always gotten it right. But if you'd ask me, I want to look at look at the Second World War. Basically, would you call the intervention of America a failure? It wasn't. It wasn't a failure. Um, would you call the intervention of America in the ceasefire in, between the Israelis, the latest one, would you call it a failure? I would call it that. Would you call the intervention of America in the case of Israel, for instance, where it has all kinds of hostile neighbors and all of that? I wouldn't call that a failure. Um, our case is quite different from Libya. Our case is completely different from Iraq. Our case is not a case of one state waging a war against another state. Our scenario is a situation where a sitting government has failed or is complicit in the massacre of Christians. And why I see more of it as a case of complicity is because of the vehement denial of it. It's so obvious. It's a pattern that has been proven over almost 2 decades. But the government is determined to deny what's happening. So that simply tells the Americans that we have refused to even admit the problem. So it's a different case if you had a state that said, well, frankly speaking, our military is overstretched. And the US is saying, okay, we could come in with some aid, hardware, possibly personnel, and then we get this done. So it's going to be a collaboration. But the country is outrightly denying what's happening. And the Americans and the rest of the world, especially those who love humanity, they see the corpses every day. They see the communities every day. They see the manner of the killings. They see the growing of, the weaponry of this Islamist. And they see the sympathy that the government extends to the terrorist. An example is they say, let's grant them amnesty, okay? Let's educate them. Let's de-radicalize them. Let's take them to foreign lands, to school. Let's absorb them even into our security architecture with the thought that they would help in the fight against terrorism, which basically we've never seen where that has worked ever since Nigeria started the de-radicalization and integration of these Islamists. So in Nigeria's case, we wouldn't say it would be failed. In Libya, possibly we would call it failed because there may not have been those mass murders going on in Libya. Gaddafi was not carrying out a genocide within his country. So it was more or less a thing of the whole state being responsible for what took place. In Nigeria, it's not as if they are saying we are waging a war on Nigeria. We are waging a war on the Islamists that the government of Nigeria has failed to deal with. And I think that's the clear line we should try to understand. And with regards to how bad a thing could get, an example is the intervention of foreign military or foreign force in our land. How bad could it get? Basically, there might be bombs, there might be destructions and all of that. But go through the middle belt. What do you say to people who would just wake up in the morning and over 250 of their neighbors have been killed? What do you say to a community where women just get taken away and they are raped one after the other? What do you say to a community that a child who is 9, 10, 11, 12 has never visited his father's house because he's lived in a primary school or in some primary healthcare center because he can't go home? So born and raised in an IDP camp on his home soil. What do you say about that? That is war. That's the worst kind of war. Far worse than Gaza, far worse than Russia, Ukraine, far worse than Sudan. But because it is targeted at a group of people that from the very onset should be subjugated, which are the Christians, the world doesn't see it. Okay? So it's important, and I think it's an indictment on our regional and sub-regional bodies like ECOWAS and the AU that they've never coughed with regards to the genocide going on. But they're all coming out to say, well, Nigeria is a sovereign state. There's no reason whatsoever why anybody should interfere in what's happening. But I mean, anybody that is comfortable with burying hundreds of people almost on a daily or weekly basis simply because he doesn't want Americans to come into the country is far worse than whatever it is that happened to Libya. That basically is what I feel.
Okay. And then another question would be, why haven't Christians themselves been able to fight back and defend themselves against these attacks? Do you want to comment on that?
The gospel came to Nigeria, and well, from a theological background, I'm thinking it will have a lot to do with the fact that the Puritans did a lot of missionary work around here, and the missionaries came from countries where the governments understood the value of human life. Okay, for instance, in the U.S., somebody can just break into your home and do something and just get away with it like that. In the US, you cannot have non-state actors, Islamists, possibly occupying a forest, maybe between one state and another, and they just go to a church and they kill everybody. They go to a market and kill Christians, and they go back to that forest. And then the United States government is saying, we will send a delegation to go and find out what the grievance is with the people. So most of the missionaries came from a background where they understood how to let the government be responsible for the protection of lives and properties. So the foundation of our Christian belief did not allow, basically, there is a training incorporated in it to pray for the people in leadership, to not be, to not rebel against the government, to not take laws into one's hands and all of that. So that was incorporated into the culture and the tradition of the Nigerian church. And that is the reason why a lot of times, even in states where at the smaller level, then, there were killings, and then it was easy for Christians to just sell off their properties and move away to safer places. And then cities were polarized, like Kaduna State. The Christians didn't see the need to defend their homes. They felt, well, our home, our eternal home is in heaven and all of that. So there's a theological failure on the side of the Christian. There's a theological error that needs to be addressed, so that the Christian understands that much as I owe you the responsibility of praying for you, and if you're sick, I should visit you, and if you need counseling, I should counsel you, there's also the duty that if you are in danger and it needs me to physically protect you, I should take that responsibility. So that there is that foundation that the Christians in Nigeria are coming from. And the second thing is, most of the communities that have attempted to organize themselves and defend themselves against this Islamist have always faced the might of the Nigerian army. I'll give you an example in 2022 and many other times. But in 2022, there is a community on the plateau, in Plateau State, called Mangu. There was an attack, and then at the end of the attack, the government was very conservative with the figures. They started off by saying just 20 people, 13 people, and then next 20, and then next 35, and all of that, and they sustained that for a while. But at the end of the day, we realized there were over 400 people that were killed. Now, the military didn't go after the killers, but then at the end of the day, they killed about 4 other people, and it turned out those were vigilante, those were community members, who were just trying to watch over what was left of their communities. So there is always that attitude from the Nigerian military that makes the Christian understand, well, we know they are killing you, but the thought of taking the responsibility of defending yourself, we will crush you the moment you try to do that. Another example is a fellow by the name of Sunday Jackson. Sunday Jackson was on his farm, and then a Fulani militia man attacked him with a knife to take his life. Okay? Sunday Jackson defended himself, overpowered him, and neutralized him. Of course, he had his own injuries, but the courts decided that he should be sentenced to death. So he's on the death row now. And the reason is that if he could dispossess the attacker of his weapon, he should have just run away. And the simple reason why that judgment went that way was because the attacker is an Fulani Islamist militia man. So there is a certain attitude that the government has, of course, unwritten. It's not as if it's a document that has been written, but it's unofficial. When they attack you, the best you could do is to run away. If you can't run away, let them kill you. But on no account whatsoever must you harm them. So Christian communities understand that the very moment I have a Dane gun, and we have suffered a lot of disarming. As a matter of fact, it got to a point where the moment we find the military or some so-called NGOs talking about surrender your arms, surrender your machetes, your bows and arrows, your Dane guns, and all of that, frankly speaking, it formed a pattern at some point. Give it 72 hours, give it 1 week, the Islamists are on their way. They would come in and they would waste lives. So that is primarily, or those two are primarily the reasons why it does look as if the Christian communities are just pacifist. Why not just fight back? It is because any attempt to fight back, we are not exactly facing the Islamists. We are facing the might of the Nigerian army, unfortunately.
Yeah. In America, we can own guns. Can you own guns
No,
in Nigeria?
we can't own guns in Nigeria. I think other than possibly, the Dane gun and all of that, a lot of which people get dispossessed of in communities. They say it's the first step to peace. So you don't disarm those who carry the RPGs, the anti-aircraft, guns, the AK-47s, but you're coming to the village to disarm those with bows and arrows and machetes who have always been the victims. So they don't allow arms in Nigeria. But I think if that was it, that may solve it. I know a pastor made a post and said, okay, fine. Let us disagree. Let us say it's not a genocide. Okay? Let's say it's not a genocide. It's just two fighting. So let's do it this way. Since the Islamist militia carry AK-47, RPGs, anti-aircraft, guns and all of that, let's arm the farmers as well with the same thing and let them sort their prices out. Okay, but it won't happen. Okay, so they don't allow us to do that. The only people that have the right to carry arms in the country would be the security agencies and then the Islamist fighters. Those are the ones. I think they are more sophisticated than our own security in terms of the arms that they carry.
Yeah, that's wild. All right. And then the last question for you is, since this has all been designated the country of particular concern, and then Trump's response as well, his social truth social post, what has been the response of Christian leaders and Muslim leaders?
Let me start with the Christian leaders. Cassandra, I am heartbroken, I'm disappointed. I believe the Christian leaders in Nigeria, not all of them, but most of them, are the kinds of shepherds that would not defend the flock from the wolves and the lions. They are the kinds of shepherds that seek the kinds of pasture that feeds them. They could starve the sheep. They do not speak of the evil that is happening. Save for platforms like yours, save for people like Mike Arnold, save for organizations that may not be based in Nigeria, save for people locally who decided on their own to sacrifice their lives and take all of the risks to document what's happening and present it. Frankly speaking, the church leadership in Nigeria is doing nothing. At a point in time, the Christian Association of Nigeria did talk about the genocide, but it looked as if a certain crop of leaders came in. The early days when Ted Cruz began moving his bail, they were the group that came out and said it's not a genocide, it's not targeted at Christians, that the bullet does not discriminate between the Muslim and the Christian. But the bullets in Nigeria do discriminate. We know that very well. And when it hits the Muslim, it's simply because he doesn't look cooperative enough. I remember they called them collaborators in places like Gaza. After the peace pact in Gaza, they went down to do their cleansing. Anybody they felt was too friendly to the Jews or not hateful of the Jews enough, they took them out. And they did that openly on the streets. So they do that to the Muslims as well. But the church leadership in Nigeria is very weak, is very cowardly, is very, I wouldn't even use the word pacifist. And I would only use that as a moral weakness, not just the fact that they love peace. It's a moral weakness. It's a failure. They are not doing anything in that regard. So you just ask, what exactly would the church in Nigeria do in the clear case of a genocide? If, for instance, Donald Trump woke up in the morning tomorrow and said, well, I gave it a rethink and there's no genocide in Nigeria, so federal government of Nigeria, go ahead with your business. Frankly speaking, you may not hear anything from the Nigerian church. So the Nigerian church leaders have failed the Christians. They have betrayed the body of Christ. That basically is what I have to say. A sharp contrast to it is what's happening on the side of the Muslims. A couple of hours ago, I was looking at certain pictures, and I wasn't in a hurry to make any post or respond about it because I needed to be sure. But I've already seen it in maybe a couple of credible news outlets. And that would be Muslims demonstrating, carrying out demonstrations and saying, we don't want America, we don't want America, don't come to our country. And what's the background of it? Because Nigeria is on the CPC list, and it looks as if it's not just going to stop sanctions, but actions will be taken to eliminate the terrorists. An example is you would find groups that are basically representative of the Fulani Islamist militia. You would find the other sects, and then you would find, ironically, the Shiites. Why I say ironically the Shiites is because the Shiite is a minority sect in Nigeria that has suffered oppression. During Buhari's regime, the trio of General Muhammadu Buhari, General Tukur Buratai, who was the chief of, I think, Army Staff or Chief of Defense Staff, I've lost whichever position he was holding, and then Governor Nasiru El-Rufai, the trio of them had over 1,000 Shiites, shot in one evening. Okay? I wasn't more than 2-3 kilometers away from there because heading back home from where I was, I would pass by that point. And I think it was on my way, they said, well, there's a lot of killing going on and all of that. So I was in the city then when it happened. Now, they've been crying, they've been protesting in the capital city that there has been a genocide against them. Thousands of them were killed. Their leader was arrested, was detained almost throughout the former president's regime. But surprisingly, themselves, the sect that killed over 1,000 of them, the Fulani Islamist, representative, whether they call them Yeti Allah, which a terrorist organization, they are all on the streets saying, US, do not come, because we don't have any problem of targeted killings in Nigeria. Now, that is because the Muslim leaders have been able to manipulate the gullible followers into believing that an attack on the terrorists is an attack on Islam. So they may be terrorists, but they are our fellow brothers. Just the way the early campaigns of the Nigerian military against Boko Haram was resisted by the North, because we had politicians that said they may be terrorists, but they are our fellow brothers, so they can't be killed as pigs, as goats, as sheep. And so they raised their voice and they frustrated the effort of the then sitting president, who was a Christian. They frustrated his effort from, he was at the verge of basically wiping out Boko Haram. So it was easy to convince the Muslim and say, he is an infidel, and then he is using the name of fighting terrorism to wipe out Muslims. So I am suspecting that that is the message that is currently going on. For you to have all of these sects, the oppressors and the oppressed, coming together to claim that there is nothing evil happening in Nigeria, so America do not come. It does look as if the rise now is not for the sovereignty of the Nigerian state, it's not for the sake of their fellow Muslims who have died, but it's a solidarity with the terrorists that are supposed to be eliminated.
Right. There's coming together to go, even though they have been subjected, Muslims have also been subjected to violence from the jihadists. They're coming together to say, well, we're all Muslims, so we're going to stick together, and then we don't want any involvement.
I'd say something to you. There is an Islamic cleric, a pro-Taliban cleric by the name of Sheikh Isa Ali Pantani, who delivered a lecture he captioned, "Who are the Taliban?" He spoke a lot about the Taliban, their margins, their tactics and all of that. In his sermon, part of what he said when he was drawing some comparison, he did say, he did talk about the subtlety with which they approach things, the timing, when you should be aggressive or when you should just lie low and do a lot of things. And when he spoke about Nigeria in that, message, or that lecture he gave, he said, for instance, if anything was to go openly, if the world was to know exactly, okay, there is this thing going on, just the way the Taliban took their time and now they overrun the country. If something was to happen like that, who do they think is likely going to step in when it becomes obvious that Christians are targeted for no? Obviously, the response would be the Americans. Okay? Now, well, bad as the Americans, always been looking for some kind of moral, direction. And then he said, when the Americans step in, who are the likely people they will side with? Okay, so it does look as if, okay, they would come for the Christians, which means it would put the Muslims at a disadvantage. And that would explain why, and that was an old message he preached. So when the denial of a genocide began, the Muslims saying, there is no Christian genocide, we are also being killed. But then, why are you saying you're also being killed? Are you saying you're also being killed because you want justice to come to you? You want your killers to be killed? No. I'm saying I'm also being killed so that you ignore the fact that Christians are saying there's a genocide. So they are comfortable with being killed by the Islamists, but they have a problem with anybody coming to touch the Islamists. So, and I think that is the reason why we are where we are, unfortunately.
Right. Absolutely. Well, is there anything else, Zari, that you want to share before we wrap up the podcast? And also, if you want to share, we do this every podcast, just in case this is the first time somebody has heard you, your social media accounts where people can follow your work. I know on X you have a social media page and you continue to highlight the Nigerian Christian genocide. But anything else you want to share? And also your social media accounts.
And it's just Zariyi Yusuf. At Zariyi Yusuf, you find me on X and you could follow me. And what I would have to say is that while we wait and look forward to, the end of this evil and a new beginning, and Christians being returned to their homes, people that have been sacked coming back, people that have been oppressed being compensated, we would hope to find people, supporting in terms of trauma counseling, in terms of humanitarian support, which is basically not happening in the Middle Belt. So you find people living we have had people that have reached out, organizations that have worked with us. So if there are organizations like that, I know the fact that the government has suppressed it, a lot of people who could have helped are not helping. I mean, you could come into the country, you could work with local organizations that are into that, and then let help get to these people while we wait for final solution to it. That basically is it. Prayers are important, and at every platform we would covet the voices of believers like yourself and many others. If you are in the parliament in your country, if you are in the church when you mount the pulpit, talk about the Christians in Nigeria. If you are a boss in the office, talk to your people about it. If you are a counselor, whatever platform you find, never get tired of telling people until justice comes and then the criminals get the right punishment that they should get. I think we would love that so much.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Zari. And also just a promotion for next month. We will be doing a live stream next month on December 6th. So if you want to join us, please go ahead and do so. We would love to have you and just for you to be able to answer questions. Well, Zari will be answering questions, and also another gentleman who's Nigerian, Frank Utu. Did I get that saying right? Okay, good. All right, great. It's a different country with different ways you say names. So Frank will be joining us, and then also Zari will be joining us for that. And so if you have questions, you want to participate, and then Zari and Frank will go ahead and field those answers for just to try to create community, but also just to raise the awareness about what's going on and hope that we can stop this tragedy going on in Nigeria. And to my audience, if you do have any questions or comments, please do leave them in the comment section. And I hope you have a wonderful morning, day, or night, wherever you are in the world. And God bless you. Bye-bye.